Getting hot outside. All right. So what are we gonna do today? I'm not really sure. I'm always a bit at a loss what to do with this. Thinking of maybe designing a struct. I'm not really sure. Have I made a struct file yet? No. Which one is which? I want it to be that way. And I'm gonna do that. Just so I can remember. I actually think it's ugly when you do underscores like that, but I'm a little bit unsure how I want to handle this. Because using a float it's a little special. I actually think it should be like this. And then we say float longitude y get set. And then we're gonna say get longitude y. But setting it, I think, should be a bit different. And here's where I'm not really sure how I want to handle things. Because... And I think we're just gonna have to start somewhere. Because the reality is... if value is greater than... I think it's 160. No, it's 360. I think. Either way, let's just do it. If value is greater than 350, then we're gonna say value equals 300 value minus 360f. Else value longitude plus value, and this is that. And the reason for that is I honestly don't know. I don't have like a clear solution for what I want to do with this. But I want to try to use longitude and latitude instead of X and Y. Because the amount of X's that exist, if we look at each latitude point, or let's say that we have like latitude 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh no, longitude. That's up and down. The further away you get from the equator, the thinner the globe is. And in those areas, you have less X's. So if you use just an array, then you have you have an equal amount of X's everywhere. So I think I'm gonna try doing it using lists. Like a jagged list of lists. Or, I don't think it needs to be a list. It can just be a jagged array. Or I don't know. Like a jagged array could be okay. But even that is kind of iffy. So I want to try storing points somehow along the longitude and latitude axes. It also leads to the next issue, which is that the longitude and latitude doesn't really mean anything in those scenarios. Because at a high or low longitude, you would have less key points in latitude, because it would be a shorter span, but the span would still be represented by 360. And that's why the location has to just be, or I wonder, I should call this like coordinate. I don't know if it's called something specific. Geographic coordinate system. Let's call it a geo coordinate. Right. But I think at the end of the day, we would end up with a jagged array. Is that a full Visual Studio and not VS Code? Yeah, this is normal Visual Studio. VS Code is abysmal. I don't know why people would work in that. So you would basically end up with, you know, something like this. This doesn't really represent it very well, but like that. And I think the best way to do it would be to measure things using the latitude. Or is it longitude? It's longitude. And the longitude kind of determines which jagged array you enter. What is MonoGame? Hello. MonoGame is a framework. Gives you some stuff to work with. MonoGame is basically the cousin of Unity. They both come from the same Microsoft XNA background. But MonoGame doesn't come with editors and stuff like that. It's more basic. But yeah, so if I make a coordinate system that's longitude and latitude, then it would be 180 and 360. So if we do this, latitude, and we change this to latitude, and this to 180, right? 180. Trying to map out a globe? Yeah. I want to represent a globe in a way that isn't just a square, because that's the easy way to do it, right? Like if you want to simulate a globe, you just make a square that just loops, just a wrapping square. That's the easy way to do it, or a rectangle if you prefer that. Doesn't matter. But I would like to do it in a more proper way if I can. And I'm not really sure how to go about it. Because I'm thinking of doing this, and then I write some kind of system to read or translate longitude and latitude into pulling data from something like a dictionary, right? Like a dictionary has a key that could be a vector 3 or a position or whatever, could even be longitude and latitude. But what I would want is I would like to be able to fetch the relevant areas that might be nearby. So like you might be like, let's say you have 1 point here and 1 point here. You might be standing here, right? And in that scenario, we would need to fetch both of these areas to some degree, right? And the same would be true for like anything that's along the axis here too. And then I would have to generate a map out of that, because the reality is that because I'm gonna try doing jagged arrays, what's gonna happen is that they're not gonna be aligned. So it's gonna be more like this sometimes, you know? And here it might look like this. So then you have to, in order to like load these areas, you'd have to piece them together. And that's like not that big of a deal down here. I mean, it kind of could be. I'm not really sure, because it really depends on how large the area is too. But if I avoid using like a tile-based system, then it could be okay, because depending on how large the areas are, if I'm accurately trying to represent a planet, then this here could have like a width of 10 on that edge, and down here it has like a width of 12. Right? Because of the curvature of the planet. For example, like that is a real issue that could crop up. And when you're trying to solve this using a classic just array-based system, you know, like Minecraft or something, this is like an unsolvable issue to some degree. Because, like, what are you gonna do? Are you just gonna, like, stretch the tiles to make them larger as you get to more closer to the equator? Like, it doesn't work. So I want to try doing this without using 2D arrays to store information. Or 3D arrays. I think it's doable. But it is a little weird, because when you're up here, like, take the North Pole, for example. How are you going to handle that? Because if we say that this is the North Pole here, and if we make the areas square, typically, let's say it's square. Then, if we look at it from above, the rest of the planet is going to look something like this, right? Like, it's going to have some zones that are like here. One that's over here. Gonna have zones that are like over here. And it's gonna do this like all across the globe around. Like, I don't know what it's gonna end up looking like. Right? And the issue with this is, even if I don't use some kind of tile-based system or some kind of array-based system, we still have to some degree cull areas, because they can't overlap. So, like, whatever information overlaps with a previous area has to be culled, depending on, like, the rotation of the area and whatnot. And that becomes kind of rough. That's like the core issue with this. And trying to figure out how to solve mapping and handling a sphere is something I've been thinking about for a long time. And I've researched it a lot. There aren't really any good solutions. That's the issue. And then the next issue is that no matter what, you're gonna have to use some kind of array or like some system, right? Because you have to be able to tell, like, what kind of terrain does this consist of. You know, just like in Minecraft, you have like dirt blocks and grass blocks and shit. This has to be made up from that. And that information has to be stored in some manner. And structured in some manner. And the easiest way to do that is just to do, you know, a 2D point-based system where, like, this is that, and this is that, and this is that. That's what I'm not so sure how I would handle it. Yeah, it's honestly really hard. If it's even possible. The next problem is how would I even represent it? I'm not sure there is a solution here, by the way. I'm not sure I'm gonna reach one here now either. Um, this here kind of represents some issues that I hadn't really thought of. Because if you look at something less extreme, like this is the pole, the North Pole, right? But if you look at something less extreme, like here, for example, if I were to have to load in like 3 areas here, like this could pretty easily be represented as some kind of like square logic. Because the thing is, you need to have something, right? You need to have like something to help you represent the ground. Could each polygon on the sphere represent an area, or would that not work? No, that's what it does. And that's where the issue comes in, because in order to make the areas seamless between each other, because that's the crux. It's not just like this loads into that or whatever. In order to make them seamless, there has to be some logic to like stitch them together and load, and knowing like what to cull. Because sometimes areas might overlap. More or less. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we focus on programming some weather stuff for now. We'd have to convert velocity into geocoordinate too. I think that should be easy though. Kind of. I mean, it won't. It's gonna have to be a function. So you're gonna have to factor in planet size in order to... Yeah. Maybe I should bake in planet size in the geocoordinate. Or maybe not. Either way, we have a weather object here. But here I just call this weather, which isn't quite right. Because I wanted to say something like... What's the fancy word for a cloud? Cumulus? Or is that a type of cloud? Cumulonimbus. No. I think the scientific name for cloud is cloud. And cloud inherits from weather object. Hello, this piss. Trying to program something that I don't know what I'm doing. like that for me every day at work. Yeah, but I'm doing it for fun. No. What else do we have? Velocity. Something like that. Now, the geo coordinate does have... I checked out the new Dune game. Not really. I looked at it a little bit, but I didn't really look into it that much. MMO survival games isn't really my cup of tea. Even though I do like survival games. Because it just typically turns into like a clusterfuck. It's just kind of weird. It's like a streamer game where you just have to have like a million people who are just like taking territory for you or whatever. Or it's like Worm Online or PAX Day, where you have to like pay to own a deed of land in the world. And the entire game just becomes like people with deeds everywhere, and it's just like it just looks stupid. Like Worm Online is just a bunch of houses. Just it's like playing a 3D version of, you know, those Place a Dot games that were popular like 10 years ago on like websites, where people just draw things with dots every 10 seconds. That's what Worm Online feels like in 3D. Except you have to pay to like have a section of area that you can dot without anyone else being able to dot there. And PAX Day sounds kind of similar. We also need a Z. Or a Y, I guess. And what else? The cloud needs to have some type of function, right? It needs... How do I determine whether a cloud is going to condensate? I was gonna play The Long Dark today, but turns out that I thought that they had finally released all the chapters for the story, but they still haven't. I bought it in 2021, and it's still not out. So they said this year the last one's coming out, so maybe I'll get to play it this year. Yeah, it came out in 2019, I think, or something. So still not done? Yeah, it's still not done. Yeah, it's pretty crazy, to be honest. Especially, like, I don't mind games taking long, but like they're selling the game, and it's just like, I don't know, just forever. Because it doesn't seem that complicated. Like they already have the game, right? So it's just about making content for it. But I guess maybe, you know, working with voice actors and stuff like that can be difficult. Like I don't know, but it is a crazy amount of time. You know, that's less than a chapter a year. So I don't really like the climate being a system, because I don't really want it to work like that. But I need to have a weather system. We can rename this weather controller, maybe, because we need somewhere to track weather objects. Oh, you don't type it like that. How does it work? Can you just do this? No. Right. So we make a weather controller, and then we say new weather controller here. Or in the main controller, we create a weather controller. Here we can do new list like that, right? This is something I don't do enough. And then the weather controller needs a public void. Yeah. Weather controller needs an update. Game time comes from XNA framework. Now the weather controller has an update. And then here we'll say something like public weather controller. Weather controller. As we create this, we're gonna say weather controller equals new weather controller. I guess I would like to have public main controller, main controller, main controller, main controller. This dot main controller equals main controller. The issue with this is that this is a very basic cloud. We can start there, but I would have to figure out how it works later. Because having just a size for a cloud means that this cloud is basically round, always. We have a round cloud, right? So then the question becomes, how do you create like some kind of cloud formation without it just being like 40 cloud objects that are all going to take time and effort and to deal with? Either way, not an issue right now, but worth considering. So the weather controller, the way I see it, would update the position on all the clouds. Yes. Because I would like to create convector systems. Convection. But that should be pretty easy logic. It's basically just hot wind or hot air, hot whatever. If the temperature in an area goes up, the air goes up. And if the air goes up, that's going to make the air spread in every direction from there. But that also means that each area needs to have like needs to have low altitude and high altitude air movement and pressure, I think. This is complicated, but this is not that complicated. It's pretty much, I've seen people program this for water movement in like roguelikes, where they simulate the direction of the water in each tile. They create water flow like that. Which is generally like not super useful, but I want to simulate the weather. This is a location. What would I call it? We have a geo coordinate. So we would need another struct, I guess. That would need to be a geolocation. Should it be a class? I think it should be a class. Maybe. Maybe not. I'm just thinking, because this is something we might have a lot of geolocations, first and foremost. And in that scenario, structs are just way faster like iterating through and dealing with thousands of structs is so much faster than classes. The ability to reference this. So you can still reference structs using ref. Should this be a struct? I don't know. Let's just go with a struct. What does a geolocation consist of? Not a position. And then the question is, how do I handle water? Like, I could just say, this is the easy way to abstract. You just say public float water percentage, right? And then you use the amount of water percentage to cool the area based on like different, as opposed to another area, assuming that, you know, the water temperature isn't boiling or something for whatever reason, which it wouldn't be, but then to me it comes back again to practical application. Like, how would I represent water? I genuinely don't know if what I want to do is even possible. Because representing objects would be easy, you know, like even if you don't use some kind of grid system, you can still represent objects, you can represent buildings and stuff using points, and then you can like construct buildings as like an object, and then you store like coordinates and stuff like that that represent the building in points, and then you just load it in just like you would any mesh, right? But when it comes to other things like terrain specifically, flowers and trees and stuff, that's easy. You do it the same way. You're just like, you just give it a coordinate XY. This is a tree, it's this type of tree, it's like rotated in this direction, right? And that wouldn't take up much more space than any tile system would. Not necessarily, I think. Might be harder to render. Because the beauty of the tile system is that, no, I think it would be fine. But the beauty of the tile system is that you can use brick maps, or, well, I would say brick maps are almost always the best. You can also do what are they called? SDFs. What is that called? Signed distance fields. Signed distance function. And that's not something that I think you really should be doing for games, because it's really, really heavy. It's super fast, but it's not very good. It's basically... I actually don't really know how it works offhand. But it's basically you create like a field, like a bubble around objects that kind of tell the rays as you're ray marching where they are and like how far they can go, and so it's like a shortcut. Where you can just kind of finish the ray trace when you reach one of those. And it makes it so much faster, many times faster. But it takes up a lot of memory space, which is something you don't really want to waste if you're trying to make an open world game. That's something you can do if you're like making a level based game where you're rendering using ray marching. Ray marching rendering is actually really good. It's really hard to do though. But it's really fast. Like, how would you represent a body of water? One of the few ways I can think of, and I don't necessarily think it's good, is if you treat empty space as like some kind of default. Let's draw it like this. right? So you have an area, and any point on this is like default. It's just like 0, 0, 0, or like 0 height. It's whatever. And then anywhere you need to draw something else would be a point. So if we wanted to like draw some kind of hill, that would be a point. So this is a point that represents a hill. Now the issue with this is that I don't think that that's a problem in and of itself. But what the issue that remains is that what would the shape be? Because this is kind of like, it's kind of like drawing a terrain using only like a circle tool, right? Like I'm building a hill here, but I want it to be a different shape. So how do I do that? Like I use the circle tool a couple more times. Right. Now I have a hill shaped like that. But now you have like 12 points. And I don't think that's great. This is shit to render, shit to read. And then how do you affect it? Like, let's say this is how it looks. And well, I guess it would be maybe okay. I don't know. Because like, what if me as a player want to like dig here? You know? If I dug down here. That's gonna be like a point of subtraction. This point would still exist until it's like completely consumed. That point would exist. And if I go and I like start digging 1 meter to the right, or like even 1 centimeter, that would be another point that would have to be like a certain size. And that just sounds like a really, really poor plan to me. Which is why it's so hard to get away from a 2D array type system, right? Because a 2D system is an array system is actually not that good, in my opinion, because it's still like shitloads of data, right? Because even with this said and done, like this is still not necessarily that many points. While if this was built up with arrays, it would be an intense amount of points. Like building a hill with just tiles is a lot. Especially if you wanted to have any kind of detail to it, because it's easy to do like Minecraft size blocks, but then you're like 2 blocks is like the size of a character. And that doesn't allow a lot of detail. So I'm just thinking of edge cases like I wonder how water simulation is usually handled. In Terraria, for example, I know it's just per block. You know, you just have water per block. That's how, like, Minecraft is even less than that. Terraria actually has some water physics, but it's just, you know, it runs from one block to another, and then all the other blocks check their neighbors always, pretty much. But how would you handle water in a system that doesn't work with an array? Like, you would, how do you define water in any area? Like, it would just have to be like an object or something, and then you would have to like propagate it into more objects anytime it splits. Like if it's like running off somewhere and then the connection is severed, then it would have to create like a new water object over here. Because I can't see how it's really handled without being an object. And even then, how would you save it? Like, let's say you create a water object and you make it like fall and fill in the environment. Like, how would you store and save the information of how the water is like shaped and do they just use like shitloads of points? I know I'm not doing a lot of programming, but I don't really know what I'm doing with this project, so I'm just kind of considering where to go with it. Because what I wanted to do really was to just program the like outlying things, make a system that I can just kind of plug in to a more like realistic or a more of a system like this, right? But I still feel like I need to plan out like how things would work. And the benefit of having an arrays type system is that you always know that there's data, right? So when you're ray marching, whenever you ray march anywhere, you can always check the point you're in. Normally, when you're ray marching, the main thing you don't want to do is check where you are. So what you do is you create a system where, or what I did at least, was you create first you make just an array-based tile system, and then you create an array-based tile system that has a larger resolution that then contains these other tiles. It doesn't need to contain it, but it needs to exist side by side. And what you do there is you take this larger size, which can be like 8 times 8 times 8 or something tiles, and then you flag it true or false, where if it's true, that means it contains a tile. False means that it doesn't. And then all you have to do is you check the large tile. And if it says false, then you can just skip. You can not only skip like one tile, you can skip all 8. Which means you can speed up the ray marching rendering by 8 times by doing that. And then what I did was I did it again. But instead of having it 8 times 8 tiles, it was like 8 times 8 large tiles. So they were like huge. And that was mostly used for like culling the sky. Because if you look up in the sky, depending on how high your world is, that's the heaviest thing to ray marched for rendering. So like, because it's the furthest amount of steps no matter what. So you're just looking at nothing. It has to rate march and find the air and find the end of the world before it can say, okay, we're like rendering the skybox now. So that's what that was for, because it made it like super fast to look at the sky instead. Because the fastest thing to render when you're ray marching is whatever is, you know, right in front of you, because it's the least amount of steps. And the amount of polygons or whatever doesn't matter. That's the beauty of ray marching. You can have infinite polygons because you don't really have polygons. You just have data that you're like putting on the screen. It's just how many steps does it take to get there. That's pretty much it. But if you use some kind of like loose positional type system like this, that makes it really hard to do that. Because then you need to contain like additional data. You need to contain like this point, what is its type, how large is it, that kind of shit, and then you have to check against a bunch of points to know what you're rendering. It could still potentially be possible to represent it using dots. Like instead of having loose dots, you have kind of loose dots, except it's using a more tile-like approach, where you have dots like this. But the dots would go in bands. This is like band 1, where they would go in latitude bands. This is band 1, and they would represent a tile type. But the issue is, like, it would have to be maybe capsule shaped somehow? Or cylinder shaped? Because they would have to fill each other in to some degree. And then, you know, like they collide like this. Well, those are boobies. But they would collide, and then, you know, they would fill in each other like this to some degree. But that's also not something that can be represented in any way. It would be really heavy to, like, calculate this. I'm not convinced I'm gonna be able to figure this out, because now the reason I would like to figure it out is because representing a globe otherwise kind of sucks, but it doesn't really matter that much. Because well, I don't know, maybe it does. I'm just thinking of, let's take No Man's Sky as an example. Like leaving the planet in No Man's Sky. Being able to show you leaving the planet as you travel away from it. That's something that becomes a problem if you're using more of a tile-based approach. Because if you just represent the world as a looping square, what you can do is you can kind of just take your position on the square and just wrap it on the planet. And that kind of works, but if you try to like move around the planet, these are like ultra edge cases, I know, but still. But if you try to move around the planet, that can result in like weird geographical errors, I think. Because you can't wrap a square around a circle or around a sphere. And that's why I would like to try to generate and represent a world using some more loose kind of information system. But that then makes rendering a nightmare. Nightmare slash impossible. Because storing... And another issue with what I was doing here, with like having some kind of system where you just store like height differences, that's just what Unity does with its terrain system, and it's trash. You can't have caves that way. I mean, you kind of could. If it was more like it's a subtraction of the vicinity, right? Instead of being elevation and whatever the opposite of elevation is, delevation. Then you could do it. And I have written a renderer. I don't know if it works right now. And that's why I'm so concerned about rendering. I would prefer not doing just old school rasterization, I guess, with polygons and shit. Because it makes it hard to render distances. And that's something that ray marching solves. So you can render really large distances. I don't know if it works. I know it doesn't work, but I don't know if it runs. Come on. Come on. I think I fucked up the movement speed at some point. Oh, there we go. Right. So This is a ray marching renderer. As you can see, we can see quite a distance. We can actually see a lot further than it looks like, because I've on purpose darkened the tiles as far, you know, the further away they go. So these are tiles. It's kind of fucked up, but these are tiles. The rendering code isn't functional properly. It doesn't render the top properly. It renders like the sides and shit. You can see you can see like this looks like ground now. Look at it from the side. This is ground, and you can see it's like sloping and stuff. That's because I've given each tile like its own internal height, and then it's rendered based on its relation to its neighbors. So you can have slopes. It looks like RuneScape or something. So I have programmed this, and this was extremely fucking hard to make. And that's why I'm concerned with writing something like this for a system that doesn't even use squares. Because reading the data and calculating for rendering it is really hard, even with just a set terrain like this. Right. So that's why, like, the ideal would be to be able to read and load in the world in this type of square system. But that wouldn't be accurate. And that's why it's so hard. Because it could mean, for example, that when you're near the pole, if you walk in somewhere and it, like, even if I have some kind of system where it checks here and like loads a certain amount of these squares, and it just kind of reads it and turns it into like one square where everything is just aligned in a square like this. It could mean that like this tile could look different if I entered from over here versus from down here versus from over here. And that would be potentially very strange. Hello, Mark. I'm just messing around a bit.
Wish we could go back
Yeah. Messing with Unity? No, I'm messing with MonoGame. You don't need Unity to do voxels or rendering. In fact, I don't even use Unity to render in any of my games so far, pretty much. This is not using Unity. I've written this rendering myself. Unity is not doing anything here. It just has a camera. Like if we look at the scene. Where's the camera? Player character. Isn't there a plane? Yeah, there's the quad. Yeah, see? It's just a square. The game is just being drawn on a square. I watched somebody using 3D rendering using JavaScript. Holy shit, it was such a pain in the ass to see. Yeah, I mean, if you're making games with JavaScript, you only have yourself to blame, to be honest. I don't understand why people do that. C# is so easy, there's no reason to not use that instead. JS is trash. If you know JavaScript, you pretty much know C# anyway. I'm not sure what the purple was, but then it's not right. It's not working right. I know it's not working right. But yeah, I mean, this is quite a lot of tiles. This is running at 400 FPS looking down, 280 FPS looking forward. I would say it's running quite well. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm gonna stop here. And I'm gonna just think on this. See if I can come to any conclusions. Because I feel like I gotta have some kind of idea for this. Might try to do some research, but it's one of those things that it's like nobody is doing it in the first place, so there's nothing to research. What game am I gonna play later? I don't really have anything I want to play right now. I might play Lost Skies because I bought that, but it's just an early access crafting sim survival game. Doesn't look that good. Otherwise, kind of running dry again. This is why I'm trying to program a bit. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for hanging. I know it was a short stream. I was hoping I would figure out more to do, but I just like ran into this right away, and now I feel like I'm at a wall. I gotta go and ponder it. Anyway, see you later. Bye-bye.